Okay. Okay, good morning. It is January 31st and Senate Natural Resources and Energy. And we are going to get started. So we are joined today by Chief Counsel Chikowski, and we're going to go through the renewable energy standards, specifically the tiers. And the reason I wanted to do this was because as we have been talking with people like the PUC or TJ Poor from the Public Service Department, they have been continuing to make references to the tiers, and I think it's just a good thing to know about, because they're all different, and so particularly when people refer to like tier 3, it's just good to know what tier 3, what the implications are, what it means, what we're really talking about. Yes. So anyways, there we are. Thank you for being here. Okay, I'll let you take it away.
Ellen Chikowski, Office of Legislative Counsel. So I'm going to give you a basic overview of the renewable energy standard, including the changes that were made last year as part of Act 179. I do have some slides that are posted on your website today. I'm going to go through them. And really, this is the sort of overview of the statute. The Department of Public Service and the Public Utility Commission really are the keepers of the details of some of this information on how it all works together. So particularly if you have questions on how some of the recs work or the pricing on that, I do suggest you hear from them. But I'm going to walk you through the structure, and this can be sort of your basic overview. So the renewable energy standard is located in 30 VSA chapter 189. Yes. I'm going to go through some of the specific statutes that are part of it. But it's part of the overall renewable energy chapter. So there is a lot of text on this slide, but this is really just to start by saying section 8004 is the sort of summary provision of the renewable energy standard. And it sets out the basic premise, which is the renewable energy standard requires retail electricity providers. I will talk about more of that on the next slide. They cannot sell electricity in the state without owning a specific percentage of that energy from renewable plants. So electricity providers, based on the statute, have to have a percentage of it every year come from renewable plants. And they do that either through owning the actual renewable generation plants or acquiring the RECs from other plants, or most of them have a combination of both. They own some and they buy the RECs from some others. Additionally, the PUC has adopted rules to flesh out what this means. There's a provision that allows for the utilities to bank RECs if they have more than they need each year, so they can roll over to the next year by banking them. There's an alternative compliance payment, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. If a utility is unable to meet their requirement in a year, there is a fee called the alternative compliance payment that they can pay. There has only ever been one small instance of a utility needing to pay an alternative compliance payment, so it is a rare enforcement mechanism. It's only happened once, and it was due to a rounding error. So it is not a frequently used tool as part of this, but it does exist. And then there's also provision that the VIPSA members, who are these small municipal utilities, they can work together and aggregate. And then it also allows for joint efforts by other utilities. So that's the high level, and I'm going to talk about the details of all of that next. Make the item. So I'm so great with this. Okay, so we use in this chapter, the definition is retail electricity provider. It is a specific and slightly odd definition, but it refers to utilities, and it very specifically refers to distribution utilities. State of Vermont has a transmission utility, that's Velco, that's different. They manage lines, the transmission at a higher level. There are 18 retail electric utilities, and those are the entities that are obligated to comply with this chapter. I'm going to go through them. because last year's bill made the requirements of the renewable energy standard specific based on what type of utility you are. The utilities basically got to weigh in on how they wanted to comply with the renewable energy standard, and that's described in the statute. So there are 18 utilities. One is investor owned. It has more than 75,000 customers. That's Green Mountain Power. There are 2 electric co-ops. It's Vermont Co-op and Washington Electric Co-op. Then there are 14 municipal utilities. Of the 14 municipal utilities, 11 of them are members of VIPSA, the Vermont Power. Vermont Snre Power Supply Authority. There are 11 members in that one.
Are you saying?
Oh,
Yes, I'm very sorry, I'm
No,
sorry.
you're fine. The slides are on your website.
Okay,
Yes.
all good.
The Vermont Public Power Supply Authority has 11 members. There are 11 municipal members. And so they are the smaller utilities and they are able to be part of this sort of union to work together. I don't know if a union is the proper word, but it's a group of them, they work together. They're allowed to aggregate to meet some of the requirements. And so they're listed there, long list. But then there are 3 municipal utilities that are not part of VIPSA. That's Stowe Electric, Burlington Electric Department, and then Hyde Park. And so they are still municipal electric utilities, but they operate on their own and they do confer with a lot of the other utilities. And then finally, the newest utility in the state, a few years ago, Global Foundries asked the Public Utility Commission to be recognized as a utility for itself. It wanted to purchase and acquire its own power as opposed to going through its current utility. So Global Foundries is identified in the statute as a utility who has a single customer that takes service at 115 kilovolts.
So specific.
Well, they have a very unique model, and so finding a way to describe them here so that we know who we're talking about, that was important. And so Act 179 did also spell out for the first time what the unique requirements for Global Foundries would be as they begin to comply with the renewable energy standard, which they are required to do. So, I skipped over to another definition that is important as part of this. So what is the definition of renewable energy? So renewable energy is the classic definition I think most people understand, which is when you use fuel from a resource that is consumed at a rate below its natural regeneration rate. So what is a resource that is not depleted when you use it for fuel? The classic things like solar, wind, hydroelectric. But there are some other details in the statute. So methane gas or other gases produced from the decay of sewage or landfills and anaerobic digestion from agricultural products, that is considered to be renewable under this. But no other form of solid waste except for silvicultural waste is considered. So silvicultural waste is often used in the burning of biomass for electric generation. Biomass is considered renewable energy, but other forms of solid waste are not.
Just to, I don't know if you all know this, but the Washington Electric has that plant at Coventry. And when they get a large percentage of the town.
100%. I think it is, yeah.
That's pretty interesting. It will eventually go away, but it'll be a long time coming. But it's pretty, so I think it actually happens.
Yeah.
So nuclear is not,
That's the next one.
oh, okay.
It's highlighted there. No form of nuclear is considered renewables.
Really?
Yep. That was a specific provision that is added. Some other states consider nuclear renewable for their standards. Vermont does not.
So trash does green.
Not straight trash.
Oh.
Methane gas from the decay of sewage or landfill waste,
But not incineration.
not incineration. So then, under the category of renewable energy, a lot of the renewable energy standard is based on whether or not a renewable plant is new or existing. And so there are a couple of requirements under the RES that their sources be new renewable, and so there's a date. So after January 1, 2010, a plant is considered new renewable. However, last year's bill did add a caveat to that, which new renewable excludes hydroelectric plants with capacity of 200 megawatts or more, so large hydro. Those are excluded from the definition of new. That means they are considered old renewable. They're still counting as renewable, but they can't be counted in the specific category as new renewable. All right.
Yes, question, yes.
Is hydro considered, is there a date by which that would not be considered renewable?
No.
Okay.
So there's this caveat though, so generally, like, this system is existing renewable versus new renewable. Large hydro cannot count as new renewable. It can be counted for the old renewable category and that is viable under other sections, but for the new category, the largest hydro won't count. And there are a number of other plants in the state that are small hydro that would count as new renewable if they're constructed after 2010. So it's more of an accounting thing that's happening here, which is like for this bucket of new renewables that the utilities are required to purchase from. You don't want to count the large hydro from there, but other hydro, of which there are a number of different plants both in Vermont and outside Vermont, they do count.
Thank you.
All right.
So they count toward the total of getting to 100%, but they don't count for that slice of this.
Yes. Yep. So speaking of which, the first tier is total renewable energy. So how much is in your total portfolio? And last year's bill put every utility on track to reach 100. And so I'll get to that in a second, but to be eligible for this category, the utilities have to acquire any type of renewable resource, regardless of when it was constructed, as long as it's capable of being delivered into New England. And so this includes not only resources in New England, but the ones directly adjacent, and so that's New York and Canada. And so then as far as the required amounts, last year's bill made it specific to the type of utility that they are. And so starting this year in 2025, each utility has to have 63% of their annual load come from renewable energy. And it's increasing by at least 4% every 3 years, until reaching 100% in 2035 for global boundaries and the municipal electric providers, and 100% in 2030 for the others. So the math on this is a little fuzzy, but it's 2030 or 2035, depending on the type of utility you are. There are 3 utilities that are already 100% renewable. And so that's Burlington Electric Department, Washington Electric Co-op, and Swanton.
Federal trash.
So
So this is the whole portfolio is 100% by 2030 or 2035.
this was basically negotiated with utilities before the building plan last year. And
Yes, they
what tweaks that we did are,
they got to choose their own adventure a little bit on this, and so you'll see with the other tiers.
Yeah.
There are different dates for different utilities
Yeah.
based on what they thought they could handle. Yeah. So tier 2, tier 2 is distributed renewable generation. I think of this as new, small, local. There are reasons to have a requirement for distributed generation. Every tier has its stated purpose, but this one is interesting. I think it comes up in conversation, which is locating small resources closer to where they're going to be used, reduces line loss, supports reliability, and avoids creating constraints on the system. So each utility is required to have a percentage of their load coming from distributed generation. And so to be considered distributed generation under this definition, it needs to be new, which again means after January 1, 2010, has to be connected or able to connect to the distribution system, and it has to be less than 5 megawatts. And so typically this is met through net metering systems, standard offer program contracts, or the individual utilities public power purchase agreements. And then last year's bill also added this caveat for utilities that own hydroelectric resources, despite whether or not they were built before 2010, they can count for this category as long as they were owned as of 2024. So there is a sort of group of older dams that the utilities wish to count for this category. So you did allow them to count it towards this category, because distributed generation can be some of the more expensive types of resources, and so allowing old hydro to count here allows that to reduce rate pressure in this category.
Can you give an example?
No,
No.
I mean, I have an example that in mind that is not the best example. The only other thing I can tell you is that in the statute itself, there is a difference between the hydro that's owned by the municipal utilities and the hydro that's owned by the others. And so I think there is a number of the utilities that own hydro dams that wanted to make sure they counted. And then as far as the requirements for each category, or for each utility, starting in 2025, and this is again based on where they already were based on the prior RES, starting with 5.8% of their annual load had to come from distributed generation. And then it's increasing 1.5% each year until reaching 20% in 2035 for global boundaries and the municipalities. And then increasing 2% each year until reaching 20% in 2032 for the others. And so we have the total renewable energy under tier 1. Tier 2 is going to get to, of that 100%, 20% will have to come from distributed resources. And then finally, there are a few provisions that are specific to global boundaries in this law, because they have unique physical attributes and things specific to their operation. And so tier 2 may be difficult for them to purchase, and so they can ask the PUC if they can use their extra tier 4 credits to count towards tier 2. The distinction between tier 4 and tier 2, I'll talk about it in a minute, but basically it's the size of the resource. Tier 4 is new renewable of any size, including over 5 megawatts.
The question, this is super basic, but is it the PUC that's keeping track of all of this?
Yes.
And how do they keep track today? Just out like a massive spreadsheet, or do they have something better than that?
So the individual utilities keep track every year, and they have to file in March what they did for the prior year, what recs they're counting for each category. I don't know if it's a spreadsheet, but the Department of Public Service then also, I don't know the exact split, but the department does the verification and is also monitoring the tracking of this. And so I do know that the department is the ones keeping track of rec prices, and so like TJ can come in and like tell you about the like prices that they're all paying for all this.
And by utility where they're all at with each of these.
Yeah, and so just so you know, like as far as like complying, there has only ever been one instance of someone missing the deadline. All of them have been keeping up with their required percentages every year. There are the 3 that are ahead, and I think a couple of the others might be ahead also, but as far as compliance, there was only that one issue where there was a rounding error a few years ago, but otherwise they're keeping up with the required amounts.
Cool. Thank you.
So then tier 3 is unlike the others. So tier 3 is focused on reducing fossil fuel usage by utility customers. And so the calculation here is a little bit different, but to be eligible, utilities can do electrification measures for their customers. So they can either incentivize electric vehicles or heat pumps. They can also do electrification of commercial operations like sawmills or maybe sugar houses, or they can have some incentives for weatherization. There's a formula to calculate their greenhouse gas reduction into kilowatt hours, or there's a formula on how to calculate this into meeting the percentage. So people are doing the math on this, and I can't explain it, but they keep track of calculating how much greenhouse gas reduction the utility is supporting. in order to meet the requirements of this tier. The other thing they can do is they can also count extra tier 2 credits they have for this category if they're not doing these electrification projects. But as far as amounts, starting in 2025, it's 7.33% of their annual load has to come from tier 3 projects. It increases at 2/3% each year until reaching 12% in 2032. This tier did not, it only had a slight modification last year. There wasn't an increase in last year's bill. It's been this 12% in 2032. The exception, which was part of the original RES as well, is that the municipal electric utilities with less than 7,000 customers, they have a lower amount. It's 6%, increasing to 10.2% in 2032. So the smallest customers, because it's focused on doing work for their own customers, may have less ability to do this kind of work, so they have a smaller amount.
Question.
So in this category or this tier, like Green Mountain Power, which is my electric utility, their program to give EV owners free things for their garages to plug in their cars, that would be tier 3.
Yes.
Okay. And they get credits, presumably they have to bundle it all together. It's like my little thing in my garage is probably not that much, but they bundle all that together and say we give this many free, this, and then there's some math that calculates it.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. So,
Yeah, and I don't know a ton about how they do that, but yes,
Yeah,
that's the
okay,
theory,
cool.
that's the theory. So. We have, so tier 1, again, the pie chart 100%, we have 20% coming from distributed regeneration and then another 12% coming from tier 3. Last year, you added 2 new tiers. They're take on a similar thing. So tier 4 is new renewable energy. And so this is a requirement that there be a specific slice coming from any size plant constructed after 2010 capable of delivery in New England. So as long as it's new, regardless of size, it can count this tier. And so it depends again on the utility type. For the 3 utilities that are already 100% renewable, Burlington Electric, Washington Electric, and Swanton, they're exempt from this category because they've already reached 100% renewable, but they're addressed in the next tier. For Green Mountain Power, beginning in 2027, it's 4%, then it goes in 2030 to 10%, then 15% in 2032, 20% in 2035. For everyone else, it's 5% in 2030 and 10% in 2035. And then there's this last category, which is the load growth category, tier 5. And so this is this is about what the utilities do after they've reached 100% renewable. So as of right now, it's only applying to the 3 utilities that are already 100% renewable. And so what they have to do for tier 5 here is that any load growth above their 2024 baseline has to be met with new renewables, as opposed to existing sources. The goal here is to encourage them to buy from newer sources. And so for 2025, 50% of their load growth, which is potentially a small number, has to come from new renewables. In 2026, it's 75%. 2027 is 90%. 2028 is 100%. Until their load exceeds 130%, 5% of their 2022 annual load. At which point the provider shall meet an additional load growth of at least 50% until 2035. And then in 2035 and after, it's 75%. This is a little bit complicated. I'm sure that someone can come in here and articulate the specific reasons why this was included, but the utilities knew what this meant, and so
if I can offer
Sure.
the limited amount that I recall from this, right, so some of the utilities were already at 100%. And so then what do we require of them? And just anticipating that their loads are gonna grow. And so this category is really, I guess I would say it's really aimed at them to say, that as your load grows, it's gotta come from renewable sources.
I do think that makes sense. I'm mostly interested about the sort of math happening.
Oh, the
in that
math.
in that
Oh, then
formula.
yes.
But,
Let's figure it. He made this stuff up.
the utilities did agree to it.
Yeah.
So I think they did have sort of numbers in mind of what was achievable for them.
I feel like some of the context for this bill was very much like, we want to move towards a more renewable grid. But that just meant different, the rate at which that was achievable for different distribution utilities was just different. So this was a way to get towards a more renewable electricity, more renewable electricity sources, while making it achievable. And that's why there's so many little tweaks or carve outs for different sets for different types of categories of distribution utilities.
And speaking of which, just my last bullet, so the only other group, so under tier 5, the only other thing it says is for GMP and the VIPSA members. They have to meet load growth above the 2035 baseline with 100% renewable. So just quick math on this is only 14 utilities in the statute, so and you may want to evaluate in 2035 if you want to address the other 4 utilities in the statute.
There's 4 left out.
There's 4 left out.
Yep.
That's the way it's working.
Okay.
And so that is the overview of the renewable energy standard.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions for Ellen on this? This is something that, as we continue to work on electricity stuff, like I think there's going to be some electricity related bills coming our way. It's just good to have this as background, and hopefully we can, sometimes, I certainly needed this refresher because I don't hold all these things necessarily in my head except for tier 3. I always hold tier 3 in my head, but for the rest of it, it's just good to remind ourselves how this works. And I'm imagining that we may need to even, it's like as it becomes relevant, we may need to refresh our memories again, so.
Well, and also having detailed overviews from like the department on how the RECs are accounted for and the pricing on that, they are definitely more well versed in the like details and the math stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. That's good. All right, well, thank you so much. All right. Okay.
It's good.
Yeah, so,
I asked to come a little.
one possibility is that I could start the walkthrough, my introduction, so I can start my introduction, and then, thank you. And it probably won't take 15 minutes. Okay, but I think, does it make sense to pass this stuff now?
Oh,
I mean, in case people wanna.
are we talking about an actual bill?
We are, I know.
That's creative.
Yeah, and we're gonna take one up.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh.
Thank
you.
Oh, it's the salt bill.
Snow bill, yeah.
Reasonable.
Yes, please, snow bill, exactly. I know, I don't know what this, oh, well, it's.
I've asked them to check into it,
Yeah.
but if it doesn't do it when they come in, they can't.
I know, it's all good.
Yeah.
Okay, so, the salt bill, I was actually really glad that, Peter Liftplum, yesterday, sort of, I felt like did a great job of finding out, the issue, that this bill actually aims to solve. So, and Peter Liftplum from the watershed division, he spoke yesterday, and said he was from the wastewater division, watersheds and stuff. But anyway, yeah, so when we think about stuff that's going into our rivers, phosphorus being one of them, salt is another one that is of concern. You heard from him about the TMDLs for salt. So I mean, I'm coming at this from a place of like, it would be great if we could reduce the amount of salt going into our rivers. But recognizing that there is this pressure on commercial applicators and businesses or municipalities to want to oversalt for the sake of safety. Right, that we think that there's you know, potentially liability if you don't have it sufficiently salted or safe. So this bill aims to ideally like reduce that liability pressure so that we can still have safely salted sidewalks, roads. But that you know, there's ideally no need to oversalt them. Another thing that's important about this bill is that it is it's an opt-in, it's not mandatory, it's an opportunity for commercial applicators, for municipalities to participate if they want to. The state is already doing this, they already have best management practices, and so this creates a training program and a certification for municipalities or commercial applicators to they can apply for this certification if they go through this program. And that certification would earn them liability protection from slip and fall suits. So there's that safety, and it also helps them reduce the salt that they're applying, which ultimately leads to less salt in our water bodies, which is great. One of the, well, another thing that's worth saying here is that salt's really expensive. So if we can help bring down the costs for businesses, for municipalities, it feels like this is one of these potentials for a win-win-win. I'm hoping. It certainly seems that way. I think it's also worth noting that there are a number of committees that this could apply to, right? So we're starting it in here, mainly because it has this potential environmental benefit to reduce salt in water bodies, but it also would apply to the transportation committee. And so it's probably gonna go over there, and it has a liability aspect, so it's probably also gonna go to judiciary. And then, you know, it's got an appropriation in it, so it'll go to pros, like there's multiple, it's got a long journey ahead, so if it's gonna make it all the way through, so I figured this would be a good one also to start with, to just send it on its path forward. So with that, we do have our legislative council here with us. Any questions on at least what I've said so far? Okay, all right. So I'll turn it over to Michael O'Grady, legislative council, to get us rolling. Yes, go ahead.
So is there kind of a fiscal note we can get with this? Because I'm being asked already.
Yes.
I thought we were gonna try and cut money just from the budget, and I'm saying, well, we may end up saving money
Well,
if
that's,
we don't.
yes. So I think that's a great call. I think we should request one. So I'll put that on my radar to do. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'll turn it over to you.
Right, do you want me to share screen, or are you all set with the copy?
They have copies. We do have copies. I don't have a strong feeling about that. Others do.
Okay.
It's on the,
Well, it's just
on the website.
Oh, it's on the website.
Yeah.
So many people are following.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
This is Michael Grady with Legislative Council. So remember when I was walking through the water quality overview with you, talking about water quality standards and how the water seems to be managed for designated uses, and how the state has to go out every 3 years and determine whether or not those uses are being met in all the waters and water segments of the state. Well, they do that, and recently they've determined that some of the waters of the state are impaired due to chloride. And chloride is salt. And they're impairing the aquatic biota and aquatic habitat and basically making those waters unfit for aquatic um, animals, wildlife. There's about 5 of those waters right now, but there's concern that there could be. And so one of the proposals that has been offered is to model after New Hampshire. New Hampshire has a program where commercial and municipal salt applicators can take a course, be certified about how to more efficiently or environmentally apply salt or salt alternatives to prevent issues with runoff and the other environmental hazards. And I think you're hearing from New Hampshire, at least the program that runs it later on today. And so that's effectively what this bill is looking at, is the New Hampshire model. And other states are also looking at the New Hampshire model. I know Wisconsin wasn't in that book. And so that's the overall overview of what this bill does. So you can go to page 2, section 1. You're adding a new subchapter to the water resources chapter in Title 10. So it will be entitled the Fluoride Contamination Reduction Program. There are several definitions that are integral to the program. What is applied salt or application of salt? It's intuitive. It's the application to roadways, parking lots, or sidewalks for winter maintenance, but it's also for summer dust control because there's use for that as well. It is not going to apply to transportation infrastructure projects. AOT uses salt in some instances in order to maintain safety around transportation infrastructure projects. They, as the chair already noted, have a program with best management practices that are already being applied. So this program is not applying to that.
What does that actually mean? What is a transportation infrastructure?
So I went to the transportation infrastructure project page, okay, to get you some things. One is down in Woodstock area, the Beachy Gorge Church. In Colchester at the Costco exit, the interweaving diamond or whatever they're calling that. The next exit up in Colchester on the way to the islands, they're redoing that. The roundabout in Burlington by Christ the King. So that type of project.
So the purpose of that exemption is worker safety, I take it.
It's worker safety and so there's already best management practices being implemented as part of the DOT project.
Okay.
But it's, once the project is done and the roundabout is created.
Well, then, for
still
example,
exempt?
no,
Okay.
because then it's not a project anymore, it's completed.
Okay,
Like, for example, the roundabout in Burlington, that is no longer an AOT project, it's no longer AOT control, that's now Burlington.
right,
And
okay,
Burlington would be the municipal applicators that would be eligible for this program.
oh, I see, it's when the state comes in and does a project that's in a municipality.
Yeah.
That then it becomes a state project, and then it goes back to, I see, okay. I didn't understand that distinction.
The question, yes.
New York also has a salt reduction program, and every bridge, primarily around bridges, which freeze before everything else. And so they've got a sign pretty much at every bridge where that salt reduction program applies. So that would almost have to go into this from the sign.
Should we move on?
Okay.
So the next definition is a commercial salt applicator. It's individual who for compensation applies salt or supervises its application. Does not include municipal or state employees, then there is a definition of municipal applicator. The individual applies or supervises for the purposes of the town, but it does not include state employees. Salt is anything that has chloride in it, chloride, calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, or any other substance containing chloride. But this also applies to salt alternatives, those that don't contain chloride but are used for de-icing, because they might have chemicals in it that might be potentially harmful to the environment as well. So then you come to page 3, line 1, the actual establishment of the program. The secretary, after consultation, it's Secretary of Transportation. Now you say, well, the Secretary of Transportation, AOT is exempt from this. But yes, they already have best management practices. Don't need to totally recreate the wheel. ANR can consult with AOT to get ideas, practices, as part of the development of the program. And the program will be about education, training, and certification of commercial and municipal salt applicators. It's going to be run through a third-party vendor. You will probably hear after me from New Hampshire how they're running it. When you go to their website, they at one point had UNH doing a course, but now they have a Canadian company that's doing it, because Canada has very similar programs. And it's totally remote. There's 13 sessions. There are mandatory minimums that you have to do in order to get certified. So that's effectively the model or the system that will be used for the training. So the program shall have DMPs for application of salt or salt alternatives by those commercial municipal applicators, but shall specifically exclude salt applications related to transportation infrastructure and construction. It shall be based on current management practices used by state salt applicators. That's why they're consulting with AOT. It will establish measures or techniques to increase efficiency in the application. Or salt alternatives that the least amount of salt or alternatives are used while maintaining safe conditions for pedestrians and motor vehicles. Establish standards when and how salt and alternatives are applied in order to prevent them from entering waters of the state. Recommend less harmful inputs that could be used while maintaining safe conditions for pedestrians and vehicles. Establish record keeping requirements for the applicators, including records describing type and rate of application, dates of use, and required submission to ANR. And then establish requirements for certification, including frequency of training, manner of training, and form and manner of application, and then any other thing being necessary by the secretary. So the commercial applicator, municipal applicator may, it is not a mandate, it's a discretionary program. They may apply to the secretary annually to be certified. Now, if the business has multiple people that are applicators or municipality, they can apply, but one person can be designated as a master commercial salt applicator. And that master certified applicator shall ensure that all employees are trained to comply with the BMPs.
So it's like a train the trainer kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then on page 5, ANR and enter consultation with AOT determines the amount of salt annually imported into the state, the average amount applied between 2010 and 2020, from winter road management and from summer dust suppression. They shall develop a publicly accessible record-keeping database for road salt purchases and applications, develop salt reduction targets to guide ANR and measurably reducing chloride levels in surface waters and groundwater, and annually report to you, the General Assembly, an assessment of the nature, scope, and magnitude of the associated impacts of salt on surface waters, groundwater, private land, property, health, and infrastructure from the state. Then you get page 29, that limitation on liability that the chair referenced, certified commercial municipal salt applicator for the owner, occupant, or lessee of real property maintained by those certified applicators shall not be liable for damages arising from passage on real property owned, occupied, maintained, or operated When the hazards are caused solely by snow or ice, and any failure or delay in removing or mitigating the hazards is the result of the salt applicator implementing the best management practices that they were certified to implement, except when the damages are due to gross negligence or reckless disregard of the hazard. So you're giving that, it's not full ironclad release from liability. You have to be applying according to the best management practices. You need to be certified, so your certification needs to be current. And you can't be grossly negligent. So even if you're certified, even if you have applying according to the BMPs and you do something that's just grossly negligent, then you will lose that liability protection in that situation. So all certified commercial and municipal salt applicators shall be presumed to be acting pursuant to BMPs for application of salt or salt alternatives in the absence of proof to the contrary. So if you're certified, you get that presumption right away. And then a certified applicator is presumed to be in compliance with the requirements when applying salt or salt alternatives according to the best management practices. And that's for water quality. So it says under this section, under this chapter, so that's water quality. So if they're applying according to the BMPs, they're certified, they're presumed to be complying with all the water quality requirements in the state. So that's another benefit to this. Page 7, line 1. If this is a voluntary program, but there are some requirements. If you are going to be in the program, you have some reporting requirements. So if you don't report, that could be a violation. There could be some more clarity in this language about what is a violation and what is not, and what the consequences may be for non-reporting. Maybe you lose your certification. Maybe it's not full enforcement by A&R.
Oh, sorry, question.
I'm following. Are you talking about reporting? I see something here about recording written record. Is that what you're referring to, or?
There's that reporting, but when you go back to page 4,
Okay.
and it's line, you're in that record keeping,
Yeah.
but then at the last phrase, and required submission for the agency natural resources. Page
Oh, okay,
4,
got it.
line 7,
Section 4, so-
yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
The secretary may revoke a certification for violation of the requirements in order to receive the liability protection. They have to keep a written record describing their practices, and including the rate and type of applications, de-icing material, dates, and weather conditions. Then there's a requirement about storage and disposal of salt. This was a huge deal years ago. EPA was going to roll this out and say that every salt shed needed to be covered, and like municipalities were terrified. And they rolled that back, but municipalities, largely through guidance from EPA, have been covering their salt sheds, but there are still some out there that are not. But this will require all salt storage facilities owned by private contractors, the state, municipalities, or other governmental entity to be mapped on the A&R Natural Resources Atlas, and the types of materials stored and practices identified, and then establish best management practices for the management of the salt storage facilities, prevent runoff to surface and groundwater, and require all state, municipal, and privately owned salt and sand facilities within 100 yards of drinking water or surface water be undercover by 2030, and all of their storage facilities by 2035. It says facilities will be eligible for grant funding, but I don't know what grant.
It does say that.
It does. Good enough. Good questions, go ahead.
So, this is voluntary for contractors. Yeah, if you want to do it, we need some kind of care. Because there are 20 sticks in. That if they don't apply annually, that they could be in violation of whatever, so I think we need to clear it out.
So I think that's partly correct, but you need to clarify what the penalties would be for failure to report. But it is a voluntary program and that program, if you decide not to do it after your first year, you're not subject to the requirements anymore. But you would not get the liability protection for both slip and fall damage from your de-icing and from any activity that might affect water quality. You would not get that liability protection as well. So those are carrots. That by taking those carrots, you subject yourself to the stick of if you fail to report. And I think it would be help to clarify what a failure to report means. Because if it's enforceable under chapter 47, the penalties, the maximum penalty under chapter 47 is $117,000 a day per violation. Because that's what you need for Clean Water Act delegation. That could frighten some people. I think you might want to kind of scale, obviously, that back and like define what that penalty would be. They lose their certification, we can't apply for certification for a year, it's $50, $100, whatever.
Yep. So like my farm, Secretary of State, I have to file with her every year. And I've missed it a couple times since I've been in the legislature and I'll call them up.
What are you filing for?
For registering my business.
Okay,
Right,
yeah.
corporation, and call them up and say, no problem, just give us $135 and. It's, you missed it, but we'll take care of it, so that's a stick in a way.
Well, that feels like a reasonable sized stick relative to, you know what I mean?
Correct.
So I think if there's gonna be a penalty, like let's scale it appropriately.
I think of it as a constant play.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, it's screwed up.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
As a practical matter, thinking about, the guy who's got a truck. Does 15 driveways, takes care of 15 driveways through winter. What are we talking about for that guy having to do? I get the sort of course, I get that part, but in terms of
Of course, and then keep records.
keep records of what, how many put on my driveway,
Or how much it's not fully detailed yet, that's the best management practices that the agency is gonna come up with. But when you look at other states, it's like how much you applied and the mileage that you drove.
mileage didn't.
Drove while
Applying. Okay, so that's a little bit of a. So I guess you just have to calculate the number of driveways.
Yeah.
And then how many times you did them. How many times you applied salt, okay, but just thinking about the practicality of it, that's my good point.
Well, and if I can jump in here, it seems to me too that if there's somebody who's small and maybe doesn't want to do this, they don't have to.
Yeah.
Right, like they can just,
Yeah.
if it's too much to do the record keeping, you don't have to do it. Right, like that's okay, yeah.
So I'm thinking back to my selectmen days, we had 2 winters when it was warm, we didn't use any salt.
Hmm.
And so supply and demand, the next time we went, anticipated we needed to buy it, you couldn't get it. Because the person or the organization we got it from didn't figure your use into their calculations.
Yeah.
And I think, so then we tried to get on to the state of ELT contract. And we couldn't get onto it because they had so much, so there's a supply and demand issue here too.
Fair enough.
So I'm not done, because the next section, you're moving out of the. The training certification EMP section into a substantive section. And I need to give you some context for this. So generally, when there's a pollutant discharged into a water. Agencies, EPA, ANR give that pollutant time to mix in the water. And before measuring to try to determine the full effect of that pollutant on the water with some dissolution. But that has been argued to not take into effect those significant effects that could occur prior to the mixings. And so the debate is whether or not to test right where the pollutant enters the water, or somewhere further into the water or wetland, where there has been opportunity for that pollutant to basically assimilate it, be dissolved into the water. On page 9, there is line 14, a directive that says when assessing compliance of the waters in the state with the Vermont water quality standards for monitoring waters. And when discharge of the waters is occurring, the secretary shall monitor for compliance where the pollutant is first discharged to or where runoff first enters a water or wetland in the state. Now, this is in Saltville because there was an issue in Shelburne a few years ago. It was a salt shed for a Vermont Railway, and there was allegations that the runoff, the stormwater runoff from that railway had fluoride in it that was affecting the memorial and the wetlands right there in the memorial. And there's a pretty big class 1 wetland in that area. And the ANR said, we will monitor away. We will monitor at a point where there's been opportunity for mixing. And they determined that there wasn't an issue. Whereas the advocate was saying, if you monitor closer to where the runoff is entering the water, you would have found an issue. So this is not about the self-certification, this is about substantive standard for testing and monitoring, and it's not just salt.
And it's, I want to make sure I'm understanding, so. So this is really about where the testing occurs. Okay.
And you're gonna get different points of view.
Okay.
Okay. Then on page 9, section 3, ANR shall adopt the BMPs for commercial and municipal salt application. Through procedure rulemaking, so they don't have to go to rulemaking. That is actually a money saver when you don't have to go to rulemaking. When they adopt those procedures or rules by November 1, 2026 for use beginning January 1, 2027. And then as part of the executive branch annual fee report, the governor shall recommend a fee for certification of commercial applicators. I don't know if that's on schedule. Well, it doesn't give a date for when they have it, because the agencies are on 3-year schedules for when they have to submit their recommended fee changes. So ANR can do that theoretically by 2027.
Why wouldn't we just do it in the bill?
You could. The question I think is like, how much is it gonna cost to contract with a third party vendor to do the training?
Okay,
And you know,
they don't have that now. Okay.
Another question, yes, ma'am.
Lost my train of thought.
I have a question.
Go back.
Okay, so just looking at page 10 of the annual fee report, because there is a fee associated with doing the training, like somebody's gonna pay presumably the state or this third party vendor to do the training. Does that mean it's also gonna go to finance? Probably.
Yeah, it will.
Fee.
Okay,
Yeah.
yep. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah, sorry, we'll move in back.
Go ahead,
Is that okay?
before I forget.
Yeah.
You go ahead, if you need to.
So is this gonna help Vermont get a credit for their EPA Clean Water Act or TMDL?
Well, the TMDL's for phosphorus, it's not for chloride, so, but it will. Help with those waters that are impaired for chloride. Because the agency has already said if you have a water that's impaired for chloride, you need to implement a salt. Management plan. And so this would help. But you probably want to talk to like one of the municipalities with. Chloride impaired water. Honestly, I think right now that's South Burlington and Colchester and. Sakini Burlington, but I think those are the three. There's the tributary, Sunderland Brook, that's Colchester. Iron Brook. That's South Burlington. And then maybe another one in South Burlington. Maybe one that runs from South Burlington into Burlington. We have to look at the list again.
That's good to know. We'll put them on the radar here.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Is there something in here that says it has to be done by a third party, contractor? Because it seems like there might be expertise within state government, it seems like the AOT might already have this expertise.
I
Just,
there is a provision that says it would be done by a third party applicator. I think that is because of convenience to the community. So
to the community?
to the applicator community.
Oh,
So people can just go online and do their training online.
that's already.
Right.
AOT does have a training program for like road foremans for that is quite well attended.
Yeah, it seems
from
to be,
municipality.
they could just add it
Yeah.
to that training and do it that way, but.
So the third party implementer started to be third party implementation, page 3, line 5 and 6.
I wonder if. I mean, we could hear from A&R if they would want to do this themselves. I don't know why we would prohibit them from doing it.
For AOT.
Yeah, maybe it could be good, or if they wanted to do it themselves, but we should hear from them.
Because if they then decide they want to, then that could, that goes that for future, but. So that's, doesn't make sense.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
This
yes,
is the shall.
yeah.
There are 2 more sections in the bill to go through.
Okay.
Page 10, line 9, section 4, this would require. When the state water segment is identified as contaminated by fluoride. That exceeds the state or federal levels, A&R shall begin regular monitoring the fluoride levels in that water. Investigate potential sources. If the source that is causing fluoride contamination that exceeds the EPA chronic or reduced standards is found. A&R shall require monitoring the physical discharge into the water into a hydrological connection to the water. That hydrological connection to a water is about wetlands, because that's now what a wetland has to be. It has to have surface water connection to tributary.
But they already do that, right?
Well, that's, remember, it's at the discharge point. Right now, they're like, oh. We might do it in the mixing zone or further away from the discharge area.
So wondering about, from required monitoring and physical discharge. It does make sense to monitor at a physical discharge point, but I guess I'm thinking about, you know, if you have like a long stretch of road. That's not necessarily one point. If it's a wetland, I guess I'm wondering about basically non-point source.
Right, so you have. That's a great question. It's a question about what is a point source versus what is not. Because that non-point that's running off the road might go into the ditch. And that ditch might go into a retention. And then that retention goes into a pipe. And then that pipe goes into a water. So that pipe that's going into the water is probably a point source.
It's a children's song there, I think.
Yes, it's. Yeah. Okay, I don't have any suggestion or thought about that at the moment, just.
So the last section, or not the last substance section is appropriation, 250,000 to A&R for that third party vendor. And it's, you probably would want to say up to 250,000.
Yeah, I was gonna say that just makes it, we have to pay them that much.
And then there's an intent statement that if there's an intent to make that appropriation, and you can find future general assembly, you all know that. But you can express your intent. And then it will take effect on passage, but there's time frames within the bill for developing the data piece and the implementation.
I just wonder if the state can do it cheaper than that by just adding it to a training that they're already doing instead of paying.
Or you kind of people. 270,000.
Yes, exactly.
It's worth asking.
Do more
Yeah.
first.
I mean, I know New Hampshire, it sounds like started that way, or no, they started with UNH and then.
They started, I think, with both of these programs, but actually, that's a question for them on how they did it. Because I think they still have a UNH recertification, but they don't have a initial certification program anymore, at least when I went to the website that said it was no longer.
Okay. And can I ask one
Yeah,
more question? So part of the, and maybe it's already in here, but part of the reporting that they would have to do, would the municipality or the commercial applicator have to report how much their salt usage has declined because they're doing these new practices?
I mean, you would see that year to year if they're in the program year to year.
Yeah, that's what I mean, saying like this year I bought this much, the next year I was able to reduce it by this much because I did the practices.
I think that's an opportunity for the secretary to include that in the reporting departments, because she will have that opportunity to determine what they are.
Okay, but it's not explicit in here.
Alright.
I would assume that's something they would want to know, the last salt they used.
Yeah, here and then there, that's good.
So just for cause and effect analysis as we're thinking through this, I know, so Alaska, they don't use salt. But they have a lot of gravel. And they come for it. And every windshield in Alaska is broken. Because people get spinning in the gravel. I mean, so what?
Made
what's
this
it-
out a little bit.
Well, right, what's the alternative? You know, because Vermont doesn't have no gravel left either.
Yeah.
So there's.
That's what's right.
I'd like to wash my car fund from the brine.
Yeah. Yeah, nasty stuff.
If you got any extra there, can you send it
It
over?
really helps on the road conditions, but my car's got like a quarter-inch of salt.
It's
Right.
like some layer.
It's all over your clothes.
I know, so. Anything else? Okay, go ahead.
I think it's 3 quick ones. Does New Hampshire require them to report of their commercial applicators that participated in their projects?
I don't know that. I have the New Hampshire statute with me, let me
We can ask them.
grab that.
Okay,
But that's a good question.
okay. Is there, as far as salt shed compliance, whether it's state, municipal or private operator? Do we know like? How big of a problem that is or isn't, or does anybody keep track of that?
Well, the agency is supposed to go out and monitor and assess each water.
So
3 years, so there is that, and they don't necessarily say every water is impaired, they might say it's stressed. They might be stressed because of chloride. So, they are supposed to try to identify where the stressors or the impairment, the cause of the impairments are coming from.
Okay,
So I do think having somebody in from the water quality program to tell you like where they see stressors and potentially from fluoride, that would be a valuable test.
okay, if yeah, there's an app, I'd like to see where they are. And then you have to put your science cap on for this one, Michael. So when salt goes into a water body, does it naturally dissipate, or is it like phosphorus which never dissipates?
I don't want to answer that. I think you need a scientist.
Okay, okay.
I want somebody that like actually deals with the different types.
Yeah, we got testimony on this the other day, and it's different than what happens with phosphorus.
Yeah.
It doesn't, so it will stay with the water and it doesn't go into the soil, it will stay with the water, is that right?
I think you're probably thinking about nitrogen, like how nitrogen over the.
Can dissipate.
Can dissipate, right? And so does
Yeah.
the chloride, does that have the same opportunity? I don't know because. So
That's the impression that I got from Peter Laflamme yesterday, but we can also have him back
That
in.
it does or it doesn't?
That it does not dissipate, that
Okay.
the phosphorus binds to plants and so again, it's taken out. He described the salt as passive and so that it just continues through whatever water is.
Okay.
But we can verify that.
But I don't think it makes a decision.
So once it gets into groundwater, it will go to the
Wherever that
lake.
groundwater.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where that water's going, and
Okay.
that was my understanding of what I heard.
Fair.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Okay, on page 6, we talked about how on line 21, certified applicator is presumed to be in compliance with the requirements of this chapter when applying alternatives according to the BMPs established in this title or section, whatever. So, and you said that that was the water quality requirements.
correct.
And now does that presume, I guess what I'm thinking, like the phrasing of this, because the water quality requirements are, this is not just the salt water quality requirements, this is all water quality requirements.
Correct.
So I guess what I'm wondering if it's too broad, in saying like, if you're doing this BMPs for salt, that you're in compliance with all of the requirements, like, but it doesn't matter if you're also, putting, like dumping phosphorus or nitrogen into the water, etc. Does that make sense? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I understand and if this language is in part based on other presumptions that are in the water quality chapter, but those presumptions are in the stormwater section. It says if you are complying with the RAPs or you're complying with the accepted management practices for forestry, you're presumed to be complying with the stormwater law and you don't need a permit. So I think you might want to discuss whether this presumption should be better cited in the stormwater section rather than in the all water quality section.
Okay. That's great, and then I have one more, which is, so on page 7, on line 4, I just want to know what, chapter 201 of this title is.
That is the enforcement chapter for A&R enforcement. So that's why I was saying you might want to clarify
Right.
how enforcement is done, because the enforcement in 201, the maximum penalty is that. I say
It's a lot.
117, it might actually be more than that. 117 used to be what it was for years and then it didn't change, but
Okay, And so if we were to clarify how enforcement is done, or like what a penalty might be, then that would go roughly here.
I would put it here, yeah.
Okay,
I mean, the entire purpose of the enforcement chapter is so that you don't have piecemeal chapters or sub-chapters. That have, oh, this is $5,000, but this is 50, and then you
Right.
get like out of alignment, but there are certain instances where. You can put a max on what the penalty is going to be. You can enforce under 201, but you say that the maximum penalty is. Whatever you want the maximum penalty to be, and you have done
okay, thank you.
So back to page 6 or 7, do we actually have BMPs yet? Are we gonna just adopt the ones that?
it. You're directed secretary to adopt them either by rule or procedure. So procedure, arguably, she could do them faster and cheaper. Especially if she's working with AOT to do it. The benefit to rule is public transparency and public input. But it's more expensive and more time.
And
And then AOT enforcement, we talked about. I know they're a little short on help. But, you know, go back to like, everybody's got a junkyard in their backyard. And somebody, municipality tries to get A&R enforcement to come and get them to comply. They never show up. So if we're gonna be giving AOT more jobs.
So this is A&R, remember that.
A&R,
Okay.
right, and that's what.
yeah, fair enough, that's, supposed to consider.
Yeah, I really
You're good.
wonder. If the only enforcement should be, rather than any kind of fire enforcement should be this year.
Certification.
Sort of interest certification and provide. Even, it's gonna scare people off.
Yes.
Again, and then we're trying to get people. And
That seems logical to me. It's like just the natural consequence that you just lose the certification and the liability protection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just throw it out as I'm thinking, it's probably not part of it, it's even a part of either. When it's whether we should. Give people $100 if they send in the report.
Oh.
Yeah,
That's
the carrot.
And
We want to do it.
but it's probably.
I just wanna say,
Yeah, go
though,
ahead.
there are carrots in here.
Yeah.
They care, I mean, the liability protection and the presumed compliance, those are
Yeah.
huge
But
carrots.
you can
that-
still be sued. You can, you know, the state can still have to go through.
You can still be sued,
So
but
process.
there's, the liability protection and presumed compliance with water quality standards is huge. Those are huge carrots.
Reduce material.
Yes.
And the reducing the cost of salt for your program, so I think that. Not to say
No,
that
I'm-
maybe we shouldn't think about other things, but
Right.
there are not no carrots in here.
There are,
So-
there are. Fair enough. Okay, I think those are all the questions I had. Any other questions at this point? Okay,
Thank you.
super. All right, so we have at 10:45 scheduled the Green Snow program from New Hampshire. So a lot of the questions about the details of how that program works, we'll have an opportunity to ask. But that's not until 10:45, so. we're
Well,
gonna-
I call them in early because I
Oh.
anticipated.
Oh,
Maybe take a little break.
amazing. Yeah, so we were gonna take seems to me that we should take a break now.
Yeah.
And then we'll,
Start at 10:30.
yeah, so we're gonna take a around minute break.
And 30.
We could do, let's do 10:30. Do 8 minutes.
So we'll get back to New Hampshire folks.
Okay, thank you.
Then-
Still alive.
Okay, we are back live with Senate Natural Resources and Energy. And we are joined today by some folks from New Hampshire, and just so delighted to have you in the committee today to tell us about the Green Snow program. I think we should do just a quick round of introductions on our end, and then we'll turn it over to you to tell us about this program, because we are considering basically adopting something similar to your good work. So we would have Senator Ruth Hardy right here, who is out at a meeting, so she should be joining us shortly.
Senator Terry Williams from Rutland District.
I'm Senator Ann Watson from the Washington District.
Drew Newman, the city of Cincinnati.
Seth Lombards from the Bennington District.
Scott Beck, Caledonia District, right next to you.
Super, thank you. Well, and if you could introduce yourselves.
Wonderful. Thank you for having us. I'm Aubrey Velker. I am our Salt Reduction and Green Snow Pro Coordinator.
And I'm Ted Deers. I'm the Assistant Director for the Water Division. Our Water Division covers all of the water programs, drinking water, wastewater, beaches, shellfish, pools, you name it. If it's water, we're it.
And good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Steve Landry. I work in the Watershed Assistance section, where I manage the state's non-point source management program. And the Green Snow Pro program lives in the Watershed Assistance section in the Water Division, as Ted just mentioned. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Yes.
We do have a presentation that we can share and kind of go through that discusses our program, how it works, especially how our limited liability has played out as well. See if I can share the screen. All right.
Go, Aubrey, go. Let's get in there. Yeah.
Perfect. Is it all showing up?
Yeah.
Excellent.
In presentation mode.
We can see your notes for whatever it's worth, but it's fine with us if I don't care.
Oh,
Switch your display settings.
hold on. Let's try this. It's weird. Should have. Hold on.
He's asking her, so I don't know.
Apologies. I don't know why
Oh, no worries.
Aubrey,
Don't
clearly
have
my
issues
praise
with this.
my praise was premature for your skills there.
All right, let's try this again. That's showing up now? Is it still showing the other screen?
You have to just go up to display settings, and then you can show it'll go to presentation. There you go.
There we go. Is that good now?
That's it. You got it.
Perfect. Thank you. Apologize for that.
No worries.
All right. So actually, I will hand it over to Ted to start to kind of give a little brief history of how the program really got up and running.
And so you're running the slides here?
I am.
All right, go ahead. All right. So thanks for having us here. It's great. We love to talk about this program. It's been an interesting ride. I've been dealing with this for almost 20 years, and I can give you a little bit of a background of where we are. If we go all the way back to 1938, we are the first state that actually used salt for regular winter road maintenance. There's some great pictures over at our DOT with guys standing in the back of a pickup truck shoveling salt as the truck moved along back in the day. So our salt use, like most of the rest of the country, has doubled in the last 40 years. And we have any number of different chloride impairments. Basically, if we go to a developed part of the state and look, we'll find an impairment. We have documented and put into our reports to Congress that we have over 50 of them. And the other thing that we've seen is even in water supply wells over the last 30 years, we have been monitoring water quality and water supply wells, our drinking water supplies throughout the state. And chloride is dramatically increased there as well, which follows the sort of what we see in surface waters at the same time. So certainly chlorides are a big concern. Next slide, please. But our story of the Green Snow Probe begins back in 2004. At that time, there was a proposal to increase the size of Interstate 93. Those of you who drive to Boston, you get down 89 and then down 93. And so it was 2 lanes both ways, and the proposal in the early 2000s was to double the size of the highway from 2 barrels to 4 barrels each way. That means, bigger on and off ramps. It meant parking rides. It meant, interestingly, it had an open drainage system. That is, the water just kind of went off the sides of the road and in, and then out into the grass and into the groundwater. This project closed all of that up, controlled all of that stormwater, sent it through treatment facilities. But as you are probably well aware, those of you who are working on chloride, salt does not get treated. Salt goes directly into solution, and it goes to wherever the water is going to go. So basically, more plowing means more salt. Now, obviously, this is an important project. The graphic that you see below you with the circle around it is the map of New Hampshire liquor outlets. And you can see the preponderance of those along Interstate 93. Those of you who have to find revenue for your state can appreciate the level of importance of that particular activity to the state of New Hampshire. It funds a great deal of our state government. And so you can see the importance of Interstate 93 to bring people up to the ski areas and up to our lakes, just like they come to yours. And so that is a really important aspect. So this project had to move forward. Next slide, please. The problem is that we had impairments in that part of the state. We had chloride impairments. So in order for the highway to move forward, we had to create a TMDL, a total maximum daily load, which is basically a pollution diet that says, here's how low you have to get in order to meet our water quality standards. And so in doing that TMDL, what we discovered is that actually the DOT, that is this giant highway, was a small fraction of the overall salt load in that particular part of the state. So while DOT was an important contributor, it was a very minor one. And what we saw is that municipal roads made a bigger difference, but the big deal is parking lots and private properties. So at that time, we had to create an implementation plan for that TMDL. And part of that was to create a training program. So we basically just stole Minnesota's training program. And we're going to encourage you highly to steal our training program, should you head that direction, because this is how we're all learning from each other. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. In fact, we're right now revamping our entire best management practice document and training, all of our training programs. So that we began to implement that. But what we heard from the contractors is that they were very reticent to reduce their salt usage for fear of being sued and for fear of losing said suits. So we began to work with our legislature on some language. Next slide, please. We had a bill that we put through a number of times. It took a few sessions to get this thing through. This is House Bill 523 of 2013, if you want to go find it, the actual legislative history and all of that. And the idea was that just like skiing is a dangerous activity, you strap slick boards to your feet and then go pell-mell through trees. Ski areas can't really be sued if you break your leg so long as they were not negligent. And that's what it says essentially in state law. And so we built this program is based on that sort of concept, that as long as you're doing everything that you should be doing, meeting industry standards, you're meeting the level of service that's required in your contract, then you are actually not negligent. You are doing what needs to be done. And if it takes less salt to do that, that's great. That's what the whole salt reduction thing is all about, is to get the same level of service with less salt. And so that became the law at that point, and we began training around it. The interesting thing about the law, and I think I've seen it in your draft as well, is it extends that limited liability relief to the property owner as well as the contractor. And that was really important to be able to build the impetus for people to enter this program, because essentially what has happened, and this is what is likely to happen for you, is that property owners, when they see this, will then start requiring Green Snow Pro certified applicators to work for them on their contracts. That's how this thing gets self-perpetuated. Next slide, please. This is that language. You have something very similar. And I do really encourage you to have a number of, if you can find a couple of friendly trial attorneys to do their best to poke holes in this and figure out the loopholes. I encourage you to do that, because we have periodically updated this language over the last 10 years because of some of the oddities that some of the trial lawyers were able to find and ways to move through this. So I do encourage you to do that. There may be differences between Vermont and New Hampshire law that would create different kinds of loopholes. Next slide, please. And so what you've seen over the years is a dramatic increase of people coming in to get trained, people getting certified. The numbers now, we have over 700 individuals and almost 200 companies that are now in the program and doing this work. That's great. I can't tell you that we're reducing salt because I don't have data that describes that. What I do have data, I have lots of anecdotal evidence from companies that have reduced their salt use by 25%, 30%, some even 50 or 60% if they've moved dramatically towards brine applications. And so from that perspective, but from the perspective of drawing people in, having them come in and get trained and at least begin to hear all of this, I think that we're being successful. The program is meant to reduce the hurdles to salt reduction. That is, this idea that you're going to be sued should not be a reason why you're using the right amount of salt in the right place at the right time. It should incentivize the training, that is bringing people in. Why? What's that carrot that you're all talking about? That's the carrot. That brings people to the table. It builds in some accountability in that we require people to turn in their salt usage. They have to report their salt usage. So that builds some accountability into the system. But most importantly, and this is what I think we all need to work together on across all of the states. We were speaking at a conference yesterday with Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Ohio on this subject, is that we all need to change the culture. We need to normalize the behavior of less salt. It shouldn't crunch when you walk down the street. That's too much salt. So this idea of normalizing it and improving the documentation for these contractors so that they also are accountable to that is really the important parts of the program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aubrey. Unless you have questions, we can stop for questions if you want. And I can, and talk a little bit more about how we got to this point, or I can turn it over to Aubrey to talk about how the program actually works.
Thank you. We do actually have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, good.
Thank you for this information. It's really interesting. I'm wondering, you said you don't have the data on the reduction of salt use. Is that just because it's too early, or are you not collecting that data?
We're collecting salt usage data for the people who are certified, but people come in and out of certification pretty regularly. The other thing that happens is that there's a lot of noise. One winter is not like the next. There's something that we've developed called the Winter Severity Index, which we track chloride levels in the state to this Winter Severity Index, which is not a great tool because it doesn't totally track the ice to snow to ice to snow to ice to snow events that we seem to be getting more of as temperatures rise in the winter. But so one winter is not like the next. So comparing last winter to this winter is not statistically robust. So that's the challenge with doing this. And so it really, that piece is a piece that I think is kind of the next iteration of what our program might look like in the future, is how do we get a better understanding of linking the salt usage to the level of service provided. That's really important, but that's another level of data gathering that we're working with on our municipal program. I will just mention we're now implementing a municipal program similarly, and it's starting to explore some different ways of tracking salt and tracking salt.
Okay, so this is just, you're just doing at the state level at this point, you're not doing municipal level yet?
We're just getting
Just
rolling.
starting, okay, and have you seen any changes in your TMDL measurements?
That's still something that we're looking through. Again, this takes a long time to see a trend. So, you know, that's what we're going to be watching. The highway finished up they finished all the construction in the highway in like 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. So we're still gathering data. Data will be gathered over a long period to actually be able to see if we see a trend. So I will just warn you that that's very hard to link all of those things together in the short run. It does take quite a while because remember, all of that salt has gone off the highway. It's sitting in groundwater. It's sitting in the shallow groundwater, and it takes a really, really, really long time for that to wash out of the watershed.
Okay, and one last question, you said that there were people going in and out of certification or applicants going in, and why is that?
You know, one year they'll get certified, the next year they're not. It's a transient industry. You know, it's everything from probably international corporations to two guys in a plow. You know, so it's a very broad audience, very broad clientele, and with widely varying levels of sophistication. So you see people coming in and out of certification a lot.
Got it. Okay, thank
And
you.
we have another question, here, go ahead.
So, and I know that you probably don't do this, but if there was some way that the state knew how much salt came in through whoever the provider was, maybe on a rail car. I know back 2020, we had a couple of years of no snow or ice, and the municipalities didn't use any salt.
Right.
The next year that we decided we needed it, we couldn't get it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So what we tried to do was get a contract to get on with the AOT purchase of salt.
Right.
Is that anything that's feasible?
You know, tracking that stuff, we have not necessarily figured out a way to do that. I can let maybe Steve or Aubrey address that more, but it is we don't have a reporting system that would make the kind of fine detailed analysis possible that I know of. We do understand the data that we do get is from DOT. So we get data on salt usage by shed from DOT. And with the municipal program, we'll be getting data by municipality. So that's, I think, our best cut at this moment. But in terms of the private sector, which uses the vast majority of the salt in the state, it's pretty hard to figure that out. You know, how do you figure out how much is coming to Lowe's or to Home Depot? Those become very, very challenging kinds of numbers.
So did you ever, I mean, if salt was considered a hazardous material, I mean, at some point, if you want to control it, maybe that's something to think about.
It certainly doesn't meet our definition of a hazardous material right now.
Okay.
Because it's an essential thing for life. So it's too much of it that's the problem. And so it's a challenge. I will just say that I've been involved in salt reduction for, like I said, almost 2 decades. And it is so much harder than phosphorus. And I know you all have struggled with phosphorus, and chlorides are way harder because you can't treat it and it doesn't go away. And it's very hard to regulate, and it's ubiquitous on the landscape, and it's essentially required for public safety. So it is not for the faint of heart, but you got to start somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That statement about it's hard to regulate, it's ubiquitous, and it stays in the stays in the water. It's hard to get it out. Another question, go ahead.
Yeah, Ted, so your other two neighbors there, Mass and Maine, do they have an equivalent program to Green Snow Pro?
Maine has begun to develop a training program, and we've met with them any number of times. We met with a group. They're doing something really interesting in Portland, South Portland, in their like you have in South Burlington. They have a residual designation authority area that is around their stormwater, around the main mall area, like you do up in South Burlington. And they're using that stormwater authority that they developed there, the stormwater utility, in order to try basically an innovative approach where they're have a consultant working directly with some of the property owners to develop winter maintenance plans that will be low salt or no salt. And so this is part of their stormwater utility. And so it's a really interesting innovation, and you all would have a similar opportunity within your, and I can't remember the name of it there in South Burlington, but you would have an interesting opportunity there as well.
Okay, the reason I asked that question is, the possibility that if, I know there's people that do snow removal and salt, and they're in New Hampshire and they're in Vermont, or they're in New Hampshire and they're in Maine. And I was wondering if you've ever considered a way to, like, one would qualify for the other, and so somebody wouldn't have to do two programs, they could just do one. It would be accepted by the other state.
Dual certification.
Right.
I would be happy if you all develop something. I would be happy to go to our legislature, develop reciprocity.
Okay.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a Canadian program too.
Yeah, we actually use the Canadian program in Ontario, Smart About Salt Council. They are a provider of training for our online training. We developed a module with their program. So they have been essentially helping us. They're an authorized trainer for our Green Snow Pro program.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
so they are an authorized trainer, but you have other trainers as well.
Yeah, I'll let Aubrey talk about that. She can talk about
Okay,
the whole
so
training
we would
thing.
have-
We have a number of different opportunities. We tried to make training as organic as possible. Because live free or die. We don't have money to run training program, but B, it's really been I think an excellent way of getting people really bought in to develop their own training programs. And we have a way to do that. We have an authorization program that allows that. And Aubrey can talk more about that.
Great. Okay, all right, well, I don't think we have any further questions in the room at the moment.
Excellent.
Awesome. So I'll kind of talk about, how our certification program works. And to start, I'm mainly going to be focusing on our commercial Green Snow Pro programs. That's our commercial private applicators. We did just get approved in May, our municipal Green Snow Pro program. It is set up a little differently, and I will talk about that as well a little later. But to start, it's going to be primarily related to our commercial program. So kind of first is, how does, somebody or a company even get Green Snow Pro certification? The first part, which we were just talking about, is complete our required course or training. We do have a number of providers that are approved to do the training. So we work with Smart About Salt Council that we were just discussing, and they provide an online training platform. This is a great option for, a lot of our snowplow guys. They are landscapers in the summer and all through fall. So they don't always have a ton of time to go to an in-person course. So to be able to have an, online training program just opens it up for more people. We work heavily with the University of New Hampshire, their Technology Transfer Center. They provide most of our in-person coursework. They do the full course, all-day courses with exams. They also do a lot more of our refresher courses as well, which I'll talk about a little more later with our continuing training that's required. SIMA, the Snow and Ice Management Association, they help us run our annual SALT Symposium as well. So once a person completes coursework, does their training, there's an exam that they need to pass. They then submit an application to us at DES, which they come directly to me. I go through, I approve, make sure they hit all their requirements for certification. And once they receive their Green Snow Pro certification, they do have to renew it annually. So they have to make sure they keep up with requirements each year. And this is sometimes where we see people coming in and out of the program. There are times where they just miss, their renewals, they forget about it. They just ignore all the emails I send them reminding them to send in their renewal applications. But to renew their certification each year, they submit a renewal application, and usually this is done, summer into early fall. All of these Green Snow Pro certificates that they are issued each year, they expire June 30th every year. So once June 30th hits, their certificate has expired. They need to make sure to submit the required documentation in order to renew. So that includes the application, annual salt use report that Ted mentioned earlier, as well as making sure they keep up to date with their education. So essentially, they are required to complete coursework every 2 years. So they need a full course, pass an exam to first get certified. And then 6 years later, they need to complete that full course and pass an exam again. The 2 years, every 2 years in between that, they need to complete refresher courses, which have a few more options for doing that. We'll talk about that. So with that continuing education, one of the great things about this Green Snow Pro program, I think what really helped is to bring about more education and awareness. Obviously a lot of these guys, they're like, hey, great to reduce salt, I can save some money. Having that limited liability component with the certification is a huge carrot to this. But a lot of them too, they just don't know how to maybe implement some of these best practices. They would love to start using brine. They would love to learn how to better calibrate their equipment, but they might just not know how. So we've really worked with some of our partners, especially University of New Hampshire Technology Transfer Center, to develop additional courses that really focus on some of these best management practices. This past summer, they did a whole liquids applicator field day, where everyone kind of got together, learn, how to use brine, how to use liquids. They even got to test out some trucks that some of our applicators who have been part of the program, they donated their time and equipment, and they're able to learn from their peers, which is also great. Learn what works well, here's our hurdles that they've encountered, how's the best way to do this? As well as there's been courses that are just specifically for calibration, to learn how to better calibrate your equipment. So that's a great thing about this program. It's brought about more of that education that actually allows the applicators to learn how to do these best management practices and how to do them successfully. So obviously cost, to the applicator is always a question. How much is this going to cost the person to become Green Snow Pro certified? There is an annual certification fee. How the certification program is set up is for the majority of companies that have, multiple people out doing snow and ice management, they're going to have one master certification holder. And this is usually someone who's kind of running the program, might be a supervisor, kind of our main point of contact. And they're the ones who have to make sure they send us the applications, the annual salt use report every year. Under them, the rest of their crew are typically subordinate certificate holders. They are all required to complete that training coursework, so they have to do their full course, they have to do their refreshers, but it's just a way for some of these companies to save a little bit of money. So most companies, if they have 5 or more people on their crew, typically going to be about a $350 annual fee for certification. As Ted mentioned, we do have some people, it's just one person and their plow truck. So there is an individual certificate, again, still have to do all the requirements, but that has an annual fee of $150. And these are the fees that come directly to us at NHDES, and they are what actually fund our program. The training and course fees are separate from this annual certification fee. The fees for the training will vary depending on the type of course, who's administering the course. Training fees are set by the training providers, so by UNH, by Smart About Salt. We do not currently receive any of those training fees, which is why we have that additional annual certification fee to fund the program. And Ted also, he already mentioned, the growth we have seen in Green Snow Pro. The very first season, we kind of had that limited liability component. 35 people were certified from 22 companies. A decade later, last winter season, we had 712 people have certificates issued, which included 177 companies. Currently, this 2024-2025 winter season, we are just at about 700, so we're kind of staying around that number, which is great to see. A lot of things that help with this growth is obviously limited liability. A lot of property managers and owners, they are requiring their applicators, in order to submit a bid for a contract, they have to be Green Snow Pro certified. As well as some insurance companies are starting to require that as well for their clients. They're requiring their clients to be Green Snow Pro certified in order to be covered as well. So we are continuing to, push some of that education, make insurance companies, property managers more aware of this program, which helps fuel that growth for it as well and see those numbers keep rising. So kind of on to, just a little bit about our brand new voluntary municipal Green Snow Pro program. The administrative rules were just adopted back in May. We didn't get the application really up and onto the webpage until more late fall. So we do not have any municipalities part of the program yet. However, there is a lot of interest in it. A lot of the towns and cities just need to get the approval, through budgets, town administrators, all of that. So we're expecting a number of them to submit applications for next winter season. For our municipal program, we do have it set up that a municipality can apply for 3 different levels of certification, either a standard, advanced, or an expert. All of these do have the same requirements. There is an annual certification fee of $450 per municipality. However, what's different from the commercial program is for municipalities, we are certifying the town, the city as a whole, versus the commercial program where we certify each individual person. So that annual $450 fee for municipalities covers their entire crew. So all their snow and ice management employees still need complete required coursework, but they're covered under that $450 fee. So again, there's training education that mirrors the commercial program. All the courses that are approved for the commercial program, also approved for municipalities. They need to submit a salt reduction plan that then needs to be updated every 5 years. And then there's also storage requirements for all their materials, as well as required documentation about their equipment calibration. If the municipality wants to go above and beyond, there is both an advanced and expert certification available, and that requires additional implementation and documentation of best management practices.
So Aubrey, it sounds like there's a question maybe there.
Oh, yes.
There is a question. Go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. Thanks, Aubrey. The fee per municipality and the requirements for municipalities, is there any variation based on the size of the municipality? Manchester versus the little teeny towns. Thinking here in Vermont, basically Burlington and Chittenden County versus many of the really, really tiny towns. It seems like having some kind of scale would be helpful.
So this was one of the things we discussed many, many times as we were writing up these administrative rules of what is the fee, because we do need something to be able to fund this. So we did go back and forth about, again, talking about, do we go by the size of the town? Do we go by the size of just their DPW department, and just became more and more confusing. You know, there's lots of, well, what about this? What about that? So we decided just to kind of go with the simplest of just having one fee. This is what it is, instead of it really just got too confusing trying to come up with a different way to do it by size, by, you know, how, yeah, just how big the population, is it by land? So that's why we went with the simpler, most simple option of just one fee, no matter who you are.
Okay.
I would say, Aubrey and Ted, we worked closely with our municipalities that are MS4 communities specifically that have, chloride impairments, and they have minimum measures under the permit for chlorides. And the municipal rules were a long, exhausting effort that was well informed by municipal input. And, this was actually the thing that didn't really get much. There wasn't a ton of conflict over setting this flat fee. There were other things that rose to the top of the contentious conversations that extended, why we just got these rules adopted in May. So your idea is a good one. If we did a per capita rate, I could get behind that, but I know my little teeny tiny town would probably argue that to death. I think no matter what the fee. So I think a flat fee just seemed to be sort of let's just hit it, and we didn't get a lot of pushback on it during the municipal discussion sessions we had.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand that. It's interesting. I just think that there are so many applicators in Burlington and that are tiny little towns like Leicester, Whiting, you have like one person.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if there's an advantage to, like, if for a really tiny town that maybe has one or two flowers.
Yeah.
Right, like maybe the individual or the, the master and subordinate scheme might be cheaper, but.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, there's one other question, yeah.
And I was just going to follow up quickly on that too. We have some small communities in New Hampshire who just contract with commercial Green Snow Pro salt applicators for their winter snow and ice management.
Yeah.
Because they just don't have the infrastructure to do it. And they're like, well, we're going to be a Green Snow Pro community by contracting with a commercial Green Snow Pro outfit.
Yeah, there's another question
Yeah,
in the.
Question about regarding your fee structure. Is your shop there that runs the Green Snow Pro, are you entirely funded by fees, or do you receive a general fund appropriation?
Yeah, we're currently funded by fees, so that's one of the things we're gonna talk about a little later, of making sure you can fund the agency staff. I'm currently only a part-time employee, just because the fees don't fund, for a full-time, but especially with how we've grown, full-time is definitely needed. So we're kind of looking into ways we might be able to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have one more question, but I also just want to acknowledge that we are gonna have to wrap up at about 11:30. So if we can, if you have one more question, Senator Williams, and then we'll see if we can hold questions so that you can get through your presentation.
So what was the response from the insurance companies? Is there any pushback initially, or?
So, yeah, I will tell you, it took us a decade to even get the time of day from the insurance companies. So where we did have some success was by individual insurance providers. So the small agencies that sold some policies, and we had some limited success getting them into the mix. At the outset, they were not really, we couldn't get this on anybody's radar screen. It took us years to find somebody from an insurance company, especially an underwriter. That was very, very hard to find someone who would actually talk to us, from one of the major companies doing that. So that, I would just say that was challenging. The people who really weighed in at the outset were trial attorneys and greens and commercial applicators. Those were the primary people, and some of the enviros. That's who really weighed in at the beginning. And I can talk about how the sausage was made at some point if you'd like to, because this was not easy legislation to get through. But we had a champion, and we had a state senator who was in charge of the budget committee, who happened to own a landscaping company. So that's kind of how this got over the finish line.
Interesting. Fair enough.
I hear you.
I don't know that we have time to talk about all of those details at the moment, but yeah, let's keep going.
I'm
Thank you.
actually going to hand it over to Steve to go more into the limited liability protection component of our certification.
Yeah, thanks, Aubrey. And I understand, we're time limited, so I'm going to probably give you the hyper caffeinated version of this and get the point across and leave some time for questions. So next slide, Aubrey. Our program really didn't have a chance to supremely test the limited liability until 2022. Prior to that date, all slip and fall cases were either settled or withdrawn. And the real bottom line here was that most of our applicators just didn't keep records. They didn't keep the right records. They didn't keep up with their training. They weren't certified at the time of the incident. So the burden was on our Green Snow Pro applicators to produce that evidence, and many times they couldn't, and everything was either withdrawn or settled out of court. Next slide, Aubrey. In this case, this is a case that started in 2019. It was resolved in 2022. A defendant that lived at the Fairways complex in Derry, New Hampshire, which you can see here on the screen. It's a massive residential complex, 3- and 4-story buildings, hundreds and hundreds of parking spaces. And she slipped and fell, sadly broke her leg, getting into her car on what she claimed was unmaintained parking lot surfaces. And as we mentioned this in this presentation already, the limited liability coverage extends not just to the contractors, in this case, North Point Outdoors, but it extends to the management company of the premises itself, Chartwell Management. So the trial started on October 31, 2022, and it went till November 7. Next slide. And just to give you an idea who we're dealing with, this is not 2 people in a plow. This is North Point Outdoors. And if a case was going to go to trial, we hoped it would be someone like North Point, because this is a large crew, 140 employees during peak season, 80 trucks, 40 sidewalk machines. At the point of the slip and fall, they had a 10-year contract with that Fairways condo management company. They had been 10 years with us in Green Snow Pro, and they had 0 claims from that property up to that point. Next slide. Just so you know, they take training very seriously at North Point and Aubrey. They are one of our approved trainers. So they train their staff, they administer the exams, they vetted their training through us. They do preseason, in-season, postseason training. And the key for them is hands-on training at their headquarters facility, which has a situation room where they train everybody. And they also do on-site training at the properties they manage, but also in their parking lots. They sent me cool videos of them pushing bark mulch around as simulated snow during the summer months to train their crews. So it's a pretty A+ operation. Next slide. And the key thing for us in the trial was meticulous record keeping. That's what the plaintiff's counsel kept focusing on, was digging in, looking at contract language between North Point and Chartwell, but also their records relative to Green Snow Pro, because the defense was solely based on the limited liability relief that this program offers. Next slide. So the whole thing with the plaintiff's counsel was to expose negligence on the part of North Point Outdoors. And one thing they kept looking for were holes in their contract language. And North Point Outdoors contract language was pretty specific, but one thing that they have changed since this trial was that they don't say that they will clear parking lots to bare pavement, period, because it's impossible, because people don't move cars at these complexes sometimes for months. So it's physically impossible to move snow for the entire square footage of hundreds of parking spaces during a winter snow event. The council is also trying to find that they failed to use best practices for snow removal. And as we pointed out during the trial, you have to use the right practices at the right time in the right conditions with the right materials. It's not one size fits all BMP management. The other thing they kept saying, something that the jury, I think, found amusing too, was that the counsel for the plaintiff kept calling our program the Green GoPro program. So that knocked down his legitimacy right out of the gate. They kept giving me kind of a raised eye from the jury box. But they kept trying to get us to admit a yes or no question was, did they or did they not follow every best management practice in your Green Snow Pro manual? And you have to say, you want to say no, because then they'd find them, negligent, but you can't. You just, so North Point defendants and myself, we all said, I can't answer that. It's not a yes or no question because it's impossible, nor is it responsible to use all practices because you don't need to. You need to use the right practices at the right time, like I said. Next slide. The counsel for the plaintiff also tried to allege that there was a failed attempt on North Point to clear pathways between vehicles. If you know what plow widths are usually like, you can't clean between vehicles. And again, some of those vehicles hadn't moved for months, so there was no opportunity to do that. The council also submitted photos of uncleared areas and said this was after North Point had arrived on site. But North Point uses GPS time-stamped and AVI software, so it logs in when you arrive on site and when you leave site, and they were able to produce those records for the court and for the jury to consider. And it said those photos were taken prior to their arrival, so they were lying about that. And the alleged slip and fall supposedly occurred on a parking lot trying to get to her car, when in fact they brought in a witness who saw her slip off one of those grassy island curbs in between her car and that area that was never maintained during snow. And a quote from our friend Rob at North Point, he says, after the thorough questioning, 6 days of questioning, it was evident that North Point's focus on best practices and their highly trained team executed the storm response to perfection, eliminating any allegations against us. Couldn't agree more. Next slide. And the jury couldn't agree more. Just power through a few of these, Aubrey. 1, 2, right there. So the jury was unanimous. They ruled in the favor of the defense. 6 days later, the plaintiff filed her motion, judgment notwithstanding the verdict, because she didn't like the outcome. The judge denied that. That was turned away because we had appropriate evidence in place. Next slide. And then she filed a notice of mandatory appeal to take this to Superior Court. And, we were like, yeah, be my guest. Let's go all the way on this one. Next slide. And in the intervening time, her counsel stopped representing her because they realized they had no evidence to stand on, and there was no further merit to representing her in this case. Next slide, Aubrey. And this was resolved in New Hampshire Supreme Court, May 17, 2023. So a very sound victory for us and something that we're really happy to share with you today. And again, with North Point as the plaintiff on this one, it was a pretty good hope that we'd be successful, but it also opened our eyes to some potential loopholes in our language and our rules and our training, and then contract language for contractor to client too. Next slide. And you can punch through the rest of the little images here. That should do it. Thanks, Aubrey. So in light of that, and since that trial, we the Aubrey, Ted, Steve Roadshow here, we have gone to make presentations to the New Hampshire Bar Association to educate everyone in the legal system about Green Snow Pro and limited liability. And more importantly, working with our great partners in Green Snow Pro like North Point to improve contract language, to avoid those loopholes and carry forward. And like I heard earlier today, this is a huge carrot for the program, and we're really happy that we can point to this huge legal success that has really tested this element of our program. And back to you, Aubrey.
Great. I won't spend too much time on this. We went through a lot of these already, just kind of things we're working on currently as this program's involved, just updating some of our manuals, our training, more outreach to the legal communities, the insurance companies, finding a way to, have a better SALT accounting system and actually figure out, is this program working? Are we seeing less salts? Are we seeing less chloride levels? Adding some more accountability procedures to our Green Snow Pro certificate holders, as well as some funding, just some possible loan grant opportunities. Again, while there's lots of communities, companies that would love to switch over to some of these practices. Some of them do require some upfront costs, especially something like brine. So to be able to have some kind of funding opportunities to provide to them in order to be able to actually implement some of those practices. But I will stop sharing so that way we can answer some more questions as well.
Great. Super, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Yes, go ahead.
How, for the contractors and the reporting, I was mentioning earlier before you were on that, you know, a lot of those guys don't like doing that stuff. How have you been able to make it pretty easy?
I mean, we do provide some templates for, you know, being able to record their stuff. Obviously, they, you know, someone like North Point that Steve just talked about, they have way more documents that they even need that's required for us. But we do, you know, try to have some templates that's, hey, this is what you need in order to have your limited liability component. If you don't want to do, you know, these documents, you will not be eligible for that limited liability. So that's definitely that carrot to making sure they are doing their documentation that is required.
But we are not the documentation police. I want to be really clear about that because we require them to hold these things. We don't ask, we don't want them. We don't want them to give them to us. We want them to do these things so that they can remain, you know, so that they can remain safe, they can be covered, but they keep them. And really the only time they're ever going to produce them is if in a slip and fall case. And that was really important to us because we did not want to be the keepers of that information. A lot of it's proprietary. A lot of it is stuff that we just don't. And frankly, as a state, I didn't want to have to go through the expense of developing databases. And the other thing is that if there were a slip and fall case, we would be required to produce those documents, which adds an enormous cost to our administration. So that is a really important piece.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that is required is when they do renew, they do have to submit their annual salt use report to us, which has, you know, the volume, the type of salt or other de-icing materials they use and square footage or lane miles treated. Yeah, that's the only requirement to get recertified. Like Aubrey said, if they don't give us that one two-sided piece of paper, they aren't going to get recertified.
Okay, and what do they have to do for their internal records that in order to, like what you just said, Steve, is what I had imagined they would be doing, but it sounds like there's actually people, and the records they would keep internally would be dates.
Yeah,
application rates, storms.
Yeah, site logs essentially. So they have time of arrival, how long they were there, did they get called back to reapply or plow? You know, what was the activity? You were on site. I had to scrape the surface again. I pre-treated with brine. They, you know, good operations have that anyway because they have to show that they met their contract agreements with the management company because, you know, and that's also how they get paid. You know, they say, hey, I can't, some of their contracts are fairly open. Like I will come back whenever you call me. Others are like, I'll do 2 visits per storm. You know, it's pretty specific. So they have those records because it benefits them when it comes time to budget for the following season too. They know how much salt they put down, how many visits, you know, things like that. So they will stress they should have all that. Sometimes they don't.
And there are private sector companies that are providing, you know, different sorts of systems for them to do that. That is something that's a place of innovation within the industry. And they go to lots of training. CIMA does tons of training on documentation and things, you know, for companies. So that's pretty common. One thing I did want to note that just for your edification, and you may want to look at your language again on this, is that we were certifying municipalities under our voluntary commercial program until one of our attorneys found out we were doing that. And we clearly, our legislation did not give us the authority to do that. So if you intend to extend this to municipalities, you will need to look very closely at your legislation to make sure that it does authorize that. And I think you want to think carefully about how are they different or similar to the kind of work done by by the commercial side, they tend to be more road focused than parking lot focused. There's some other differences. They tend to use bigger equipment in municipalities than they do for commercial activities. So you really, I think I would, if I were you, I would take a look at that issue. We chose to ultimately just to focus on the commercial side, and then we recently added the municipal side, and it looks very different. Those rules look very, very different than what they look like for the commercial side.
That's really interesting. So thank you. One other question for you about, if somebody doesn't apply for, you know, a renewal, or they, you know, they're not doing all the things that maybe they should be, like record keeping or whatever. There's no penalty for those folks, like that you all are enforcing upon them.
And they just lose their certification, and it's very disappointing. We've
Okay,
had some very, very hard conversations with some people where
right.
they had a slip and fall, and it was right before they re-upped their you know, their certification. So they had no liability protection. And
Yeah,
we've had some very, very disappointing conversations with people about that.
and okay, thank you. And there's one other question, and then I think we are gonna need to wrap it up.
So just in general, any fiscal considerations that the state has to take into consideration if we decide to do this?
Yes. As the chief bureaucrat in the room, I will tell you that our fees do not cover our expenses for this program. I would not, if I were to really do this program correctly, I would want to have 2 staff people. I would want to have one person that was covering more of the administrivia, and then I would want to have one person who was out doing outreach and interactions, coordinating training, building best management practice documents, building marketing documents to support the industry, interacting with insurance companies, that sort of thing. There's really 2 full-time jobs. Also, you need a database. So don't, you know, any of you who have been with the state long enough to see them procure IT services know that that's no small feat either. You need to be able to do that. If I really had my druthers, I would also have some dollars to be able to do some loans and grants, to be able to really draw people in. I think that that's the other hurdle. If you're trying to eliminate hurdles to less salt, to using less salt, that would be one of them. Ohio has an amazing program that they implemented as part of their H2 Ohio program to do non-point source and cyanobacteria issues. It's really, they're put out, I think, $40 million in the last couple of years to do salt reduction.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you, Steve and Aubrey. We have to go to the floor.